friends. I hope you had great holidays and this year will be better than the previous one. My holiday, for example, was relaxing yet super productive because let's say that I just launched my own personal webpage just like that with all my models from 2011 to this day. And I also finished this small facade, but don't worry, this video won't be about it. It was just my own little personal project for my own happiness. Instead, we'll build this German E-100 monster tank and we'll try to build it in a more interesting yet believable way. So, you know what? Let's check it out. I actually had an E-100 from Dragon in my stash, but when I looked at it, I didn't want to struggle with all its flaws, so instead I bought a newer kit and used most of the aftermarket from the old one. And when I opened the box, I was met with the best looking armor texture I've ever seen, so I was really pumped. Let's start with the mouse turret because it's such a beautiful piece. Not just for the texture, but also the shape. I like this configuration since I saw it for the first time in the old Shanghai Dragon catalog. However, I was immediately met with a small problem because this resin mantlet from Paper Panther Productions doesn't fit. The brand's been out of business, but I had the mantlet in my old Dragon kit, which is totally inaccurate, and even though the Amusing Hobby one is much better, the resin piece looks just a bit sharper. Luckily, the modification was nothing horrendous. I just had to shorten the mount for the mantlet so it would sit flush with the turret, and then I used pieces of sprue and plastic offcuts to make it all fit together. The first modification is out of the way and the model already looks more premium. So after gluing the turret pieces together, it was time to improve the surface, and the first step was scraping all the sharp edges and subtle hints of flash. Even though the textures are nice, they still look a bit artificial, so I just knew I would rework pretty much everything. You don't often use an AC drill on scale models, but when it comes to these metal pins that help to hold the large steel plates together, there's hardly a better tool for that. We'll add some flame cut texture and weld beads around them, and in the end, they'll become a fantastic detail. Speaking of weld beads, I reworked like 95% of them. The original ones look very nice, but nothing beats the natural look of custom-made welds. And because the original weld lines were so nice and clearly defined, removing them with chisels and thus deepening the grooves for new welds was very easy. There are places where the weld lines end for no reason, and a few places on the hull where they don't even line up, but we'll get to those later. For now, let's just enjoy this initial stage where the massive turret is prepared for some heavy metal treatment. The first step in this process is, of course, adding steel texture with Tamiya putty diluted with Mr. Cement S. But why would I rework the beautiful texture, you might ask? Well, if the texture is nice already, I'll just hit it with a thin layer of putty just to modify it even further. But there are also places with no texture whatsoever, and I'll need to texture those as well. So this way, I'll have consistent results all over the model where no surface will be left untreated. Even now we can see that the original texture is still there, just slightly enhanced. The next step is what truly makes these monster tanks look heavy: flame cut marks on the steel plate cross sections. I wanted to make these details stand out, and as such, I employed 3 different tools for the job: a needle file, a sharp hobby blade, and a Tamiya scriber. Each tool produces slightly different results, and when we combine them all together, our reward will be a beautiful, gnarly texture. It's worth mentioning that the real mouse turret had these surfaces machined to a smooth finish, but it's easy to imagine that a late war mass-produced tank would be made to much lower standards. Take the Tiger as an example of crude late war engineering. And even from a storytelling perspective, someone who knows nothing about tanks can look at this and immediately know that the tank is heavily armored. Before I started adding the weld detail, there were a few more plastic welds that I decided to remove, but it all depends on how they look to you. Some were very nice, especially on the hull, so I didn't even touch them. Alright then, welding. Or, in other words, restoring what we just destroyed with chisels, am I right? Yellow Tamiya epoxy putty is my favorite medium for the job, and if you're hesitant to try this method for the first time because you're afraid about the results, use a heavy tank as your first subject. Seriously, the welds are so massive that it's pretty much impossible to make them look out of scale. Check out how thick the putty noodle is and how in some cases it's having a hard time filling the groove. This is also one of those rare cases where I use up all of my mixed putty and then I have to mix some more. On most models, it's the opposite problem. I always end up throwing the unused putty away. And if you still manage to apply too much of it, and it would make the weld look out of scale, just carefully slice it away so it sits flush with the surface around it. Easy and quick. Texturing is the most rewarding part of the process, and I recommend leaving the putty sit and solidify for a while so it can create a strong bond with the model. And also, it won't be as soft once you hit it with texturing tools. My tool of choice for these long, multiple pass welds was a sharpened piece of sprue, but this time I tried a curved hobby blade, and it works really well. In fact, it leads to a much sharper, cleaner texture. But of course, it depends on the result you're trying to achieve. A messy texture of spilled welds is more desirable on Soviet tanks, for example. The mouse turret has a combination of welds, and sometimes it's pretty exciting to replicate how they meet in the corners of these interlocking armor plates. We can guess how the welders approached the job and tried applying the welds in horizontal lines, and when the weld was vertical, it led to this texture, resembling a single bevel weld bead. This is where I resort to my custom tools bent from soda cans or sheets of copper foil. And if it's already a lot of fun to sculpt these textures, just wait and see how much fun it is to paint and apply washes over them. So that's the rough construction of the turret finished for now. Let's now focus on the hull so we can see how massive this tank will be. First of all, I had to glue all the armor pieces together. Having to glue two parts together just to build up the armor thickness is a certified super heavy tank moment. The upper and lower hull fit together without any issues, but when we look closer, there will be gaps that shouldn't be there. However, an extra amount of glue and some pressure will get rid of them. Letting the melted plastic dry, sanding and texturing will make them completely invisible. Before we start the heavy metal treatment, let's focus on the running gear. This is the weakest part of the Dragon kit, and it was nice to see so much detail on this model. But I wanted to take it a bit further and make the suspension sag from the immense weight of the mouse turret and the giant 12.8 cm gun. The springs won't be visible, so I only focused on these end parts, and while the rear suspension is in the default position, the front springs are as bottomed out as possible. I also removed the aligning pins, so I could position the suspension swing arms to my liking. The rear axle sits about 9 mm from the ground, so I placed the front piece at about 10.5 mm, so 1.5 mm deeper into its travel. Once the front and rear swing arms were firmly glued in place, I added the remaining ones and lined them up with a straight edge. This way, all the wheels will touch the ground. Once these were firmly glued, I dry fitted the road wheels and started gluing them together using large amounts of super glue. This is my absolute favorite method of handling overlapping road wheels on German tanks, because you won't see the messy super glue, but you can handle the complicated running gear as a single large subassembly, and what's even better, you only have to line the wheels up once. Once you glue them and everything is kept in line, their geometry won't get messed up later down the road. It's an absolute win-win on all fronts. Okay, now we can prep the hull for texturing, and here my main focus will be to make a few parts look more logical. Here's how we can use the spilled plastic as a filler, and just scrape off the excess on those large armor cross sections. Another problematic part is this. It just doesn't make any sense. Historical photos don't help much either, so I had to employ a good amount of guesswork to end up with this result. It seems that the front and side plates were machined, so they could accommodate the hockey stick-shaped adapter for the side skirts. You can fix a lot with scribing and filling. The only requirements for a successful job are knowing what your goal is, knowing and trusting your tools, and most importantly, believing in yourself. Although I don't claim that my solution is 100% historically accurate because, again, historical photos don't capture this detail too much, it's still much better and more logical than the kit rendition. A similar problem occurred on the interlocking front plates. The weld lines didn't line up, but some careful scribing solved the issue. The rest of the welds were super easy to remove because all of them were just long, straight lines. And once I was cleaning them with modeling cement, I had that good feeling of a job well done. Adding all the texturing techniques was the cherry on the cake. Some diluted putty to enhance the steel texture, heavy flame cut markings with 3 different tools just like on the turret, and I gotta say, they give the tank such a menacing look, don't they? Like, you could win the fight just by driving this tank towards your enemy and they would probably surrender because nobody wants to get hit by these giant steel razor blades. Adding the weld beads can surely test your patience, but for me, it's an absolute reward. You spend a lot of time correcting the model and preparing the surface for the final touch, and now it all comes to fruition. As I said, even if they are recreated nicely in the kit, it's hard to beat the authenticity of your custom sculpted welds. Especially if they overlap each other. That's just... I didn't see a kit where they would nail the look. So there we go. Even though it was a slight recap of what we have already done on the turret, it's such a wonderful feeling to take the plain kit and get it to this stage. I could just stare at textured and welded armor models for hours. Now I could relax a little and add the remaining plastic details from the kit, or prepare some parts for photo etch details. However, in this case I took a much better part from my Tacom Yak Tiger from a few years ago. Speaking of the Yak Tiger, I purposefully kept some leftover parts from it because I knew I would one day use them on the E-100. Both vehicles share the same gun, so I thought making the E-100 look slightly more like a Yak Tiger would be a pretty cool concept. As such, I 3D printed new mounts for the gun cradle and fitted the whole part on the front plate. I think it would make sense in real life because the gun was so massive and it nicely breaks up the otherwise flat surface. The 3D printed Bosch headlights from Heavy Hobby are one of those details that we all missed 10 or 15 years ago. And although they're just tiny details, they make such a huge impact on the model. Oh, and one more thing. Keep the seam lines on those toe shackles whenever possible, because they were visible on the real ones as well. And voila! That's the front section finished with a small custom touch. Let's now focus on the side skirts and make them more interesting. First of all, I added pieces of plastic rod and drilled holes into the hull, so I could easily add and remove them during the painting process. With the drill still in my hand, I also opened up these holes which were molded shut, but reference photos show otherwise. A bit of scraping with a knife was necessary to open them under the desired angle. These strange details definitely looked nice, but I didn't find any trace of them in references, so I simply removed them. But now I'll do something that's definitely not in reference images, but Adam Wilder did it on his E-100 and the effect looks so incredibly good that I just had to do my own interpretation of the extreme texture. You see, the thing is that one would think that these side skirts were rolled and forged steel plates. But some details such as the bolt housings suggest each piece was a metal casting. If that's the case, it opens up a lot of possibilities in the texturing department. Large gouges in the metal might be the result of sand molding, and the countless pits might be caused by air bubbles trapped in the mold once the molten steel is poured in. Here I could also dust off one of the oldest detailing techniques with these simple foundry marks cut from kit sprues. If you're careful, you can slice the part numbers off with a sharp blade and glue them to the surface. Again, this is pure artistic license because I didn't see any heavy texture in historical images, but Adam did a really good job on his model, and this is one part where I just couldn't resist and borrow his idea. Also, the tank has only 3 side skirts on each side, which limits our options if we want to have an irregular finish, and I decided to add 2 on one side and leave the other side empty. Next up are the photo etch details from Voyager, and these were all quite simple. I didn't use soldering at all, and even the most complex pieces were held together with superglue. The best thing about this VMS superglue and debonder combo is that you can be messy, but in the end, the result is super clean. You can get them and everything else from VMS directly on their site or through Michigan Toy Soldier, links down below. I often get asked about tiny photo etch clamps, and it's been a while since I filmed the process, but all I can say is a pair of tweezers, or even 2 pairs, and some patience. Once you get the parts together, the clamp will work just like the real one, but I like to secure them with superglue so they won't flap around during the painting stages. It's much easier to first glue them to the tools and then attach the entire assembly to the model. If you want empty clamps, things get easier, and missing tools can liven up the model just as much, if not even more. I also added this box for infrared equipment, all assembled with just superglue. The Voyager set for the Dragon E-100 comes with all this nice bling, including the IR device. Grab handles were my usual ordeal, drilling out their holes in the plastic parts and bending a 0.4mm copper wire in this nifty grab handler tool made by Robert, my Patreon member. If we want to go crazy with the details, a weld bead around each end would be appropriate, but for my needs, superglue was enough. In other news, I spotted this massive socket wrench in the tank blueprints, so I made an approximate 3D model based on the drawing because it's a ridiculous yet authentic detail for the tank. I also added a few spent 128mm shells from my Yak Tiger project, and the 3D files for these are available on my Patreon. So that's the rear end of the tank finished. I also added the tow hitch from the Yak Tiger, that's the big thing between the exhausts, a tow cable from leftovers, and the gun cleaning tube is also included in the Voyager set. Speaking of which, the mouse turret hatches are so tiny that there's no way of mounting the IR device and including a figure. I could always put it in the gunner's hatch, but that would make no sense. Oh well. Anyway, another 3D design based on the blueprints is this pulley system. The beams are already included in the kit, but the pulleys, I had to guesstimate how they look based on a few drawings and a couple of screenshots from War Thunder. Not authentic, but hey, it's something. Okay, and the last step was adding some shell impacts. It would be a wasted opportunity to keep the model without them, and besides, I'm trying to refresh my skills with this project, and shell impacts are one of those details I haven't done in years. I used to drill out the holes with a rotary tool on my previous models, but this time I used a soldering iron for convenience. It also allows you to quickly make an impact under an angle, and then it's just about cleaning the excess molten plastic with a hobby blade. We can leave them like this, or enhance them even further by adding a small amount of Tamiya putty, letting it cure for a few seconds, and pushing it out with the sharp end of a paintbrush handle. The putty will add a bit of that gnarly, torn up texture to the impact. And with that, my mission was over, my friends. At least in the construction department. Painting and weathering are the topics for the next video. I probably needed a what-if model like this in my life because tanks were becoming a chore for me, but this one's been a lot of fun. If you look twice at the figures, you might notice something similar. The commander in the hatch is the same figure I used on my Yak Tiger, and I chose him because he was my first serious attempt at figure painting, and I'd like to make a direct comparison with my current figure painting skills. The second guy leaning against the turret is the same figure I have on my mouse, because it's such a fitting pose for the large turret, but it will also thematically tie these two models together. Some would say it's an uninspired idea, but for me, it holds a lot of value. Also, when it comes to these what-if paper panther models, I like to keep the modifications and color schemes subtle. Our imagination is indeed the only limit, sure, but I like to keep certain rules and guidelines in mind. It's the same question as what lies beyond the observable universe. Well, probably more of the same stuff we can see. And how would Germans build their tanks in 1946? Probably the same way as they did until 1945. I wanted to stylize this tank as a Jagdtiger, and my original idea included 3 rows of spare tracks on the turret, until I realized it wouldn't look so good as I imagined. And the pulley mechanism for the side skirts made just more sense. So until the next one, I want to sincerely thank you for watching these videos, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be building models for a living, and I can't thank you enough for it. All of this is also possible thanks to my incredible patrons. My whole Patreon page is like a night shift magazine subscription, as I post there pretty often, and you'll get updates from my workbench where I share my thoughts and insights. We can get in touch through DMs, comments and emails. I'm posting 1 week early ad-free videos, and those stay there forever, so you can always get back to them. I also have some extra goodies, such as 3D models which you can use for detailing your projects, a bunch of real-life references for nature, old buildings and so on. And last but not least, these high-resolution studio photos which show the model in more detail than video ever could. It will help me a lot, but no pressure. Anyway, I can't wait to start painting because, as I announced last year, I'm going old school with this paint job. No shading, no artsy-fartsy bullcrap, just a plain base coat, oil paints, washes, all the good stuff. Maybe even a hand-painted camouflage, so I'm gonna get down to business. Thanks again, I love you all, cheers!
Instead, we'll take a look at Instead, we'll build this German E-100 monster tank, and we'll track in. Oh, and just by the way, did you notice this kick-ass new haircut? Am I crutchny?